Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee. I'm going to be your host here for today, and I hope you are still staying safe amongst the pandemic. What we've got here for today is actually pandemic-related news, how things are shaking up for the Big Ten as well as for the ACC. And we even talk about my newest and latest predictions in Week 9 of the NCAA season. Happy Halloween, and for all the friends across the border, Happy Dia de los Muertos. Let's get right into it. We have some pandemic-related news, including the fact that the best player in college football right now, the most likely number 1 overall draft pick, Trevor Lawrence, has tested positive for COVID-19 as of Wednesday morning. Now, he's going to be out this week against Boston College. There's a chance he might be out versus Notre Dame, which is actually going to take a huge hit, and I'll get into that next week. But the thing we have to think about is the fact that this brings a great opportunity. Freshman quarterback DJ Oyangale, currently sitting at 6'4", 250 as a freshman. He's gotten a little bit of experience in the Clemson system, 12 completions on 19 attempts at 63%, 102 yards, no touchdowns or interceptions. However, he does have 8 rushing attempts for 32 yards for a pair of touchdowns. Now, there's a reason why I brought a lot of that up. It's because we don't see a lot of quarterbacks in the NCAA who essentially have even any potential to start their freshman year, because there's usually an upperclassman who's more skilled and just better than them. And they usually don't wait to take over until after the upperclassman graduates or gets drafted. Which makes sense, if you ask me. And the thing is that with Trevor Lawrence most likely going into the draft next year, this is Uyangale's time to shine. Because of the fact that he's going to play for at least 1 game, maybe 2. He can show their coaching staff and Dabo Swinney that he has what it takes to take over for Trevor Lawrence when he goes to the draft. He has the potential. And it's a great test for him early on, especially because of the fact that he was actually a 5-star recruit heading out of high school. He was the USA Today High School Offensive Player of the Year, threw for 48 touchdowns and 3,300 yards as a junior. As a senior, he threw for 4,200 yards, 48 touchdowns. And another thing that benefits Oyangale is the fact that he has baseball experience. Now, you might just look at me and just be like, baseball experience? That doesn't have to do with anything. Think of some of the top quarterbacks who are currently in the NFL. Kyler Murray played baseball. Got drafted in the MLB, actually. Russell Wilson got drafted in the MLB. Josh Allen also played baseball. Patrick Mahomes' dad is a former MLB player and also got drafted in the MLB. 4 of the top young quarterbacks in this league all played baseball. And that is one thing that Oyangale definitely has going for him, is the fact that he has that background. Where literally he is doing nothing but throwing, working on the aim, the way his hand moves, and the way that maneuvers the ball. This is going to be a great test for Oyangale. Especially because Clemson, before 2014, did not have any notable quarterbacks. I dug through their history and there was no one of note. All I know is that when Deshaun Watson was a freshman, he was more of a 1B, 1A type of situation instead of a pure starter. Because he split reps with Cole Stout, and they only had about a 400-yard difference. Deshaun Watson actually had 5 more touchdowns than Cole Stout, 100 fewer completions, but also about 150 fewer attempts. And then with Deshaun Watson, you get Trevor Lawrence. And then Trevor Lawrence comes, and then what could come out of DJ Olanglai, we do not know. But whatever he produces this Saturday is going to say a lot about what his future is going to be. Because if he has a great game, not a good game, a great game, he will most likely be a bona fide starter whenever Trevor Lawrence is out of Clemson and goes into the draft. He's shown he can sling it in high school. Let's see if he can bring it to the next level. And from my experiences with the pandemic, it's not very fun to live with. I tested positive way back in March. I'm well now, but from previous experience, it's not a fun time. And speaking of not having a fun time with pandemic-related news, the Wisconsin Badgers have had to cancel their game this Saturday coming up against the Nebraska Cornhuskers due to about a dozen Badger players testing positive for the virus. Now, the thing here is the fact that there were about a dozen people within the Badgers program who tested positive, according to head coach Paul Christ, who said it's about 6 student athletes and 6 staff members plus contact tracing. The thing is, Wisconsin's number 9 in the country right now. And they look great against Illinois. Absolutely dominant, actually, 45-7. The thing about Wisconsin is how quickly can they come back and get ready? Because the thing is that next week, they do not have a very tough task. They got Purdue. But then the week after that, they've got Michigan. And Michigan is right on their heels. And Michigan has a really good chance to make a push into the top 10 this week. With the way schedules line up and the way matchups are, they have a chance to be top 10 this week. And if Wisconsin's not healthy and ready by then, depending on who those 6 players are, they could be in deep trouble. They can most definitely be in deep trouble, especially with the fact that if any of their top prospects or top starters were one of the 6 or has to stay quarantined due to contact tracing, there's no way they'll be ready for such a tough task like the Wolverines. And if they're not, I know Jim Harbaugh is going to be ruthless. The Big Ten kind of shakes up a lot too because of the fact that Big Ten only plays Big Ten. And we've seen so many schedules shift around. Like Florida's shifted around with their game against LSU. We've seen it with Cincinnati before. We've seen it with South Carolina before. We've seen it with Wake Forest before. Army. A lot of big programs have had their schedules shifted around because of this pandemic. I hope all of those who had that recent diagnosis get better. And this is a lot of the stuff that we expected with all these teams and players coming back to play. Especially, 100,000%, especially when most of these schools have been allowing fans. And with contact tracing, more staff members and players are going to be in some isolation for a bit. Kind of like how Trevor Lawrence is out versus Boston College because he's currently in quarantine. Could shake up everything. And once again, we have 0 answers and 0 idea what's going to happen. All we know is everything's being pushed back. That was my opening segment regarding the recent news, including pandemic-related issues. And coming up right after the break, put your money where your mouth is, one of my personal favorite segments. I go over my top picks of the week, as well as that little nugget of sports betting terminology that will help you in your repertoire. Coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back here once again on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Ryan Lee once again back here. We just talked about some of the latest updates regarding pandemic-related news, and now we are going to be going into one of my personal favorite segments, Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is. And I have been so good as of late, knock on wood. I was 2-0-1 last week, 3-0 the week before that, and 3-0 the week before that. And I believe I was also 2-1 the week before that as well. So right now I'm on a little bit of a roll, once again, knock on wood. And I have seen actually a lot of really good matchups so far. But the thing is that some of these matchups that I have seen so far, there's a lot of them, and it's hard to only pick three. As much as I would love to bleed into a fourth one, I want to keep things consistent, and I want to stick with three. The thing about this week is that it is a very strange week for college football. Cancellations, high-level players getting infected, stuff like that. It is a very strange time in the world right now, and none of that really changes. So the thing that I'm going to be talking about today is this thing that is a very common thing in betting terminology. Very common. It is this thing called prop bets. Now, what exactly are prop bets? Well, they're smaller bets within the game. So every single bet that I have referred to up to this point is about the bet for the entire game. You know, the spread, the money line, the over-unders. Those are for the entire game. The prop bets are things within the game. So it can be something as small as who's going to score first. Right now, I have Michigan versus Michigan State's prop bets pulled up because it was the first game on my list. And one of them is what is going to be the over-under, what's going to be the spread, and what's going to be the money line for just the first half. Same thing with the first quarter. How much is Michigan going to lead by after the first quarter? Right now, it says that Michigan is going to lead by 7 in the first quarter, and that Michigan's going to lead by at least 13 going into halftime. Even tiny things like who's going to score first. It's going to be something simple, like will the first score of a game be a touchdown or a non-touchdown, essentially a safety or a field goal? Who throws the longest touchdown of the game? Is that going to be over 53 yards or under 53 yards? They're essentially small little bets within the game. And all it does is just makes the game a teeny bit more interesting, because instead of maybe picking the whole game to just watch through, you might say, I'll bet for a half, or I'll bet for a quarter, or I'll bet for an event to happen. They're very nitpicky and very momentarily. I personally do not like prop bets because they're so random. And part of me feels like if I were to do prop bets, my excitement drops the second the event happens or doesn't happen. And my excitement throughout the game is just not as high as it was. But that's just me. People love prop bets. I personally do not. But they exist in the realm of betting, and that was what prop bets are. Now, I'm going to go into my 3 games of the week, because I think each of these matchups have a lot to offer. We have got... This is actually my game of the week, and probably everyone else's game of the week. 2 of the top programs, universally speaking. Penn State versus Ohio State. Now, the Buckeyes are currently 3rd in the country according to the rankings, and they currently are 1-0. The Nittany Lions are ranked 18, and they had their first loss to Indiana. Now, the statistics I'm going to go over, I can only base off of one game. So, as per usual, not super reliable, but it's all we've got. So, in Ohio State's 52-17 win over Nebraska, they gained a total of 491 yards for 276 on the ground, for 215 on the ground, and Justin Fields was able to throw for 276. While they allowed 370 yards, they allowed 160 yards in the air and 210 on the ground. The Nittany Lions narrowly lost to Indiana 35-36. But in the time they did that, they got 488 yards, 250 on the ground, 230 in the air. 211 of those yards were allowed for 170 in the air and 41 on the ground. Even though this is a very small sample size, this tells me that Penn State has a great front seven, or at least a good front seven. And what they can do is that they can potentially stop the run, maybe get some pressure on Justin Fields, and maybe make him a little more uncomfortable inside the pocket. Because the thing is, with the spread as great as it is, currently sitting at 10.5, it's going to be a little tough for Penn State to really rattle him. The scheme that Ryan Day has conducted has been very good in terms of the offensive production and the way they manipulate their offense. It really has. And the thing with that is that if Penn State cannot keep up, they're going to be in big trouble. Ohio State was a national championship caliber team last year, and they are again this year. Whatever Ryan Day has cooked up, it's going to have to be good. Because the Lions have, historically speaking, been a really good program. On defense as well. The last time these two played, it was November of last year. Ohio State was number 2 ranked at the time, and Ohio State won 28-17. The spread right now is Ohio State minus 10.5. I'm going to say by the slimmest of margins, Penn State's going to keep this game very tight, and they're going to keep it very close from what I've seen from them so far. And yes, they had a terrible loss to Indiana. However, this team has definitely the potential to do something great. The thing is, that half a point is what's deferring me, and that's why I'm a little split. Because the thing is, I could see 10-13. If the spread was at, say, 12.5, I think I'd pick Penn State. But I think because it's 10.5, if it was something closer like 12.5 or 13, I think I'd pick Penn State to cover. But I think, honestly, Ohio State can still win this game. I think they're going to win regardless. Ohio State, the Buckeyes will. But I don't know how I feel about that 10.5. I think part of me might be surprised like I was with Clemson and Miami a couple weeks ago, because I thought Miami could keep it close, but I still picked Clemson to cover that game. And you know what? I'm going to say the same thing about Ohio State. I think Penn State's going to keep it close, but it's going to be just out of range of that 10.5, maybe something closer like 11 or 13. That's something I could definitely see happening. The next game of the week that I want to focus on is the number 6 Oklahoma State Cowboys taking on the Texas Longhorns, currently sitting at 3-2, while the while Mike Gundy's Cowboys are currently perfect at 4-0. Now this is a very, very good matchup. Because the thing is that, number one, Sam Ehlinger has had an outstanding season so far. 1,400 yards, 17 touchdowns. He's been great. He's even the Longhorns' leading rusher at 293 yards and 7 touchdowns, which is crazy if you think about it. The big thing with Texas is that they have not played the greatest competition. Their toughest opponent so far was Oklahoma, and they lost in a narrow one. Oklahoma State has at least had to play something against the Iowa State Cyclones. But let's look at this numerically. 45 points per game on offense for the Longhorns versus 28.5 for the Cowboys. However, the Cowboys have a major advantage on defense, 12 points allowed versus the Longhorns 32. 482 yards on offense for the Longhorns, which breaks down to 307 yards in the air for Sam Ehlinger, plus 174 yards on the ground. Versus Oklahoma State, who's sitting at 420 yards in total offense, comes about 203 yards in the air and 216 on the ground. Their defenses are actually run very similarly. 383 yards for the Longhorns, allowed 253 in the air versus 130 on the ground. The Cowboys, they allow 303 yards, 176 yards in the air versus 127 on the ground. I would say the number one matchup to look for here is Sam Ehlinger's arm versus this Cowboys secondary. By far the most interesting matchup. Because the thing is, 176 yards in the air by defense is nothing. That is nothing. And the thing is, Sam Ehlinger has just been slinging the rock all over the place. I mean, 1,700 yards. He's currently sitting at 114 and 185. Comes about 62%. 17 touchdowns and 5 picks in only 5 games. He is really slinging the rock all over the place. But the thing is that Oklahoma State knows how to shut it down. They have a great rushing attack. But the thing is, Oklahoma State's favored by 3.5. Coming off of a very close win to Iowa State. But the thing is that Oklahoma State got complacent. Oklahoma State led by 2 scores and then just laid back. And then the Cyclones could just slowly nitpick their defense, which kind of concerns me a bit. I think Texas can actually surprise people by keeping this game close. I do think this could come down to 1 score. But my biggest concern is it going to be 3, 4, or 7? I'm going to take Oklahoma State minus 3.5. But I'm very hesitant on it. Because Texas definitely has potential to be within 3 or even upset. But I am going to lock in Oklahoma State minus 3.5, even though I'm very iffy on it. But going solely based on what I have, it's the pick I'm going to make. The final game I'm going to be selecting for is the number 16 Kansas State Wildcats versus the West Virginia Mountaineers. Currently, West Virginia sitting at 3-2, while Kansas State is sitting at 4-1. Now, this is going to be a very interesting game because this is a Northwest matchup. This is a Midwest matchup. Both of these teams have a lot of games under them. They have both played very similar opponents, especially in this all-conference matchup style. Kansas State has shown that they can surprise a lot of people. And they can even upset some of the best teams out there. Like Oklahoma, when they played, they were ranked number 3 in the country. And Kansas State just rocked them. It shaked up the entire college football landscape. Especially because they've been very efficient. 35 points on offense versus the Mountaineers 32. However, the Mountaineers have been better on defense, 21 points against versus the Wildcats 23. The Mountaineers have been putting up numbers on offense, 460 yards, which breaks down to 291 yards in the air, as well as 169 on the ground. And in terms of the total yardage for Kansas State, they have 367, breaks down to 238 in the air and 129 on the ground. However, Kansas State's defense needs some work. They need to figure out what's going on. They need to figure out fast. 427 yards allowed, 268 in the air allowed, and 159 on the ground allowed. And the Mountaineers have been actually very good on defense, 152 yards allowed in the air and 109 yards allowed on the ground. To me, in my opinion, the biggest matchup to look for is actually not even a matter of strength versus strength. It's a matter of strength versus weakness. Can West Virginia exploit Kansas State on their offense? And can they just exploit Kansas State's defense? Because the thing is, if Kansas State and the Wildcats, if they can step up and not let West Virginia walk all over them on offense, Kansas State is a shot. The weird thing is that ESPN's matchup predictor has Kansas State at 52% probability, but the spread says it's West Virginia minus 5.5. So this is where I'm torn. Because the thing is, they both have very similar production in terms of points. However, in terms of yardage, this is where they really differentiate in terms of production and yardage. Part of me feels like Jared Dedge can actually maybe do something against this Kansas State defense because they've not been as good as they should be. Currently sitting at 64% completion percentage. That's very good. 9 touchdowns and 3 interceptions through 5 games is not great. But I think there's a time for Joe Dedge to just let it rip. It's now. That offense of the Mountaineers, if it can do what it has been doing, I think they can absolutely drop Kansas State 10 spots on their ranking just because West Virginia is favored by minus 5.5. But I don't think they're going to cover the spread. If they win, it's going to be tight. It's going to be something like 3 points or 4 points, not 5.5 to 6. There's no way, in my opinion, it's going to be 5.5 or 6 points. If anything, it's going to be something like 3 or 4, and Kansas State's going to keep it close. They even might have a chance to win. But regardless, Kansas State is going to do everything they can on their offense. Even though West Virginia is a very stingy defense, they're going to do everything they can on their offense to make sure they can keep up the pace. And I'm going to take Kansas State plus 5.5. That has been it for Putting My Mouth Is. That has been it for the show. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to write a amazing review and feel free to leave your comments down below. Feel free to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And feel free to come back here next week, Wednesday, for another installment of the GSMC College Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Lee, and for all of us here at the GSMC Podcast Network, have a great rest of your nights.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.